Welcome to Accelerating Education. Here's our host, Richard Capone.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Richard Capone. I'm the host today for Accelerating Education, and we have a special guest with us today. I wanted to introduce Dr. Lynn Ryan, professor of Providence College. And I met Dr. Ryan at CEC a couple weeks ago in Baltimore, and I wanted to interview her because she's got some great stuff to tell us about. But first, let's start off. Dr. Ryan, could you give us a little background on yourself?
Yes, as you mentioned, I'm a professor at Providence College in the elementary special ed program. We've had a merged elementary special ed program since the 80s, perhaps. And so I teach courses, I supervise field experiences, I get out there with children. It's a wonderful job, and I have wonderful students. I do the most recent research project, the one you met me on, was the one related to IEPs. And I've been interested in IEPs for quite a while. I did my dissertation on IEPs, and I worked as a higher ed consultant to the Department of Ed for over 20 years related to IEPs here in Rhode Island. So it's the foundation of the services provided to children with special needs, and it's a really important part of services. So it's
That's
an area
great.
I'm interested in. Yeah.
I think one thing I think is so great on teacher ed programs is that when you're doing, obviously teaching, but also doing field work, right? Working with students, because I think sometimes,
Yes.
there's this idea that professors can be in their ivory towers and they're disconnected. But I like that you have, also this program where you're helping and working with students. So, thank you so much for being incredible.
Well, it's the joy of my life to get out in those classrooms and see our students and, seeing them when they're early in their career. Ours is an undergraduate program. And when they finish, they're eligible for licensure in elementary and special ed. But seeing where they are at the beginning and then watching their developmental progression, and then they're really ready to go at the end of, they have a full year of student teaching. So they're really ready to go at the end of student teaching. So it's exciting.
That is exciting. So I met Dr. Ryan at CEC, and in it she was doing a data session talking about AI and IEPs, and I was really intrigued. It was a really interesting study you did. First of all, not all studies are very good, right? So the reason why, and I'm always one of those nitpickers. When I hear a study, I'm like, you're telling me it's statistically significant, but it really doesn't have much of an impact. You know what I mean? So, but yours was
Yeah.
different, and it really struck me as such. So, could you tell us a little bit about what you chose, what you wanted to figure out in the study, and then the results?
Well, I try to engage in research that's inquiry oriented and that can impact my teaching. And so with as we were chatting about earlier, I mean, AI is just all over the place. And I really felt that by engaging in some inquiry studies, I could really focus on how it's impacting special education in particular, and how I need to be preparing our teacher candidates for what they're going to be experiencing in the field. So I decided to start with IEPs because I had gone to a presentation where the person had talked about a number of uses of AI in education, and they talked about IEPs, and I said, this is interesting. This is an area I'm interested in. So I thought about it a bit, and I decided with the work I had done with the Department of Ed, we had done professional development and developed some case studies and IEPs. So I thought, well, why don't I use one of those case studies and compare different AI systems, because there's a lot of them out there, and I was just curious to see how they compared. And then in addition, with our teacher candidates in their junior year, the second semester before they go out student teaching, that's really where we focus on preparing them to get the information and develop IEP. So we have a role-playing activity where we give them a case study, they prepare the case study, and then they come into class, and then we assign them randomly to so-called IEP role-playing groups, and within those groups, we assign them to different roles of participants at an IEP meeting. And so I thought this would be helpful to look at the IEPs that they generated and also compare them to the ones that AI systems should generate. And it does indeed inform our practice. I've shared that with the results with my colleagues, and it will influence our teaching. We're still trying to figure out how we're going to use what the role AI has, but we can talk more about that as we go into the study.
All right, great. So you set this study up. You have these trained teachers evaluating data set, and then you have AI, three different AI systems evaluating the same data set, right? So that's sort of how you set it up. And then tell us about, or maybe I'm not saying that correctly, but maybe tell us a little bit about that setup and then the results that you got.
Well, the first set was with experienced educators, and we had a community of practice that developed these professional development materials. So I asked so I took those IEPs that we developed as a community of practice and that we use for professional development, and then I took the case studies and I developed prompts, and it took a while to figure out the prompts that I wanted to use, but I wanted to be consistent with the prompts across the three AI systems. So I developed the prompts. I used them in the three AI systems based on the case study. So I fed the AI systems the case study and then systematically gave them the different prompts, starting with the present level, the annual goals, and the short-term objectives and the monitoring of progress. And I did a similar thing with our teacher candidates IEPs. I took the ones developed by the different IEP role-playing groups. We had 4. And I took their IEPs and I took the case study and I plugged that into the 3 AI systems with the similar prompts. And then I looked at what was generated and compared them to what the experienced educators in the IEP community practice had generated with the 3 AI systems. And then I compared what our teacher candidates in their role play had generated with the 3 AI systems.
And what did you find?
Well, interestingly, we looked at them in terms of 30 quality indicators based on the research literature and IDEA in terms of what those different components should have. And we had 2 trained researchers evaluate them. And so they rated them on these 30 indicators and essentially found there was no difference between the IEPs generated by the 3 AI systems and the teacher candidates. And I should say the experienced educators. In terms of the teacher candidates, as you might have remembered from the study, there was one teacher candidate IEP group that, for whatever reason, they didn't finish. So there's, I should have probably just thrown it out, but that's the reality when you're a teacher educator, so you have to give some groups a little bit more support. So I wanted to present all the data. But with the teacher candidates overall, there was no difference in the IEPs they generated compared to the AI systems.
Well, actually, what I think is sort of funny about that, or I think it's good to include it, because the reality is we always talk about in testing, right? The human test administrator, there's test, I already forgot the term, but there's bias on the test taker, right? And that's a real thing we measure, but that's why we say, well, when you go to a computer adaptive testing, we don't have that bias. There could be other biases, like someone can't
Well,
use
there
their mouth.
certainly are other biases, for sure.
But I think it's
Yeah.
interesting because I think that was interesting you had that in there because that's reflective of the reality. Let's say, teachers run out of time. Suddenly they're pulled into something else, an emergency happens, and they may not be able to do it. So, yeah, and what was impactful for me is when I saw it was you had those really, I think it was like 3 groups of humans, 3 groups of AI, and they were all sort of, comparable. One of the groups of humans was a little lower. And then there was, of course, a little caveat on the hallucinations in that one area of the parent feedback, right? Tell us a little bit about that. That was sort of an interesting breakout.
So this was on the educators, the experienced educators case study. There were no concerns of parents mentioned in that case study. But yet in the prompt, it was with the 3 AI systems, because that's one of the quality indicators where the concerns of parents noted, it was included. And therefore, 2 of the AI systems inferred concerns of parents from the information that was included. And but I think that's an important point for people to recognize, and that they have to look at the information that's given to them and really check it for its
Yeah.
accuracy.
Well, and I think
Yeah.
it's also a way of we have to realize how AI you interact with it, right? Like if I ask the AI, write an IEP or present level statement for Richard, he's in fifth grade and he's struggling in math. It
Yeah,
literally would write a huge story
that's right.
because by default it fills in the gap. So we have to realize the prompting. You would just say, "Hey, if you don't get any information in an impact area, don't make anything up. Leave it blank, or state
Yeah.
that you have no information." And that's really maybe a gap in your prompt engineering, which could be fixed next time.
Well, I noted that as a limitation of the study, that I came up with these prompts and they were consistent across, and I didn't continue to prompt as you would
Yeah,
do with AI. So it certainly is a limitation.
yeah. So what you said you did three different AI systems. What AI did you use? I'm
Well, I would
curious.
prefer not saying, Richard,
Oh,
because
okay.
I'm not here to. I think from my study, what it told me was that you really have to look at the AI system that's going to work best for you or your district, because there were differences. Although there were no difference in terms of the significant differences, there were differences among the three systems. For example, one system gave 4 IEP goals, another system gave me 7 IEP goals. And one of the IEP goals was not even in an area in need of support. They threw it in for
Mm,
maintenance and generalization. And so I do think it's important. There's so many platforms out there that
yeah.
it's really
Yeah.
important for individuals and or districts or schools to look at the platforms and find the one that works best for them for whatever reason.
Okay, that makes sense. That's a great answer. And I would also argue that what happened before is totally different what's happened today. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I
Even
just
when, yeah, I was
yeah.
going to say, even when I started, kind of getting used to AI and the systems and how to put in the prompts, between that time and the time that I started the study, there was major difference. I mean,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it is important. And the other thing is, I didn't pay for any of the AI systems. I didn't have a subscription. I just took what you could do it free as a
Commercially
teacher.
available, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Just sort of last thoughts about that is, I know what you mean. Like we're using ChatGPT, OpenAI in our system right now. So right now,
Right.
we could push our summary reports in math and reading, and we could say write a present level statement in math and reading, and then we could also tell it to what are the next 10 skills I should work on with this student, right? Which is a precursor to setting up annual goals and all that. And it writes it beautiful, but every time you ask it, it's a little different, right? And so
Yes.
so I realize one of the things we're going to need to do is the next step will be to customize each GPT for each major customer, because we're going to
Mhm.
have examples, sort of like what you're saying, to say, okay, you got to give it some kind of framework under which to operate. Otherwise, it really is going to vary. And I think, that's sort of what we're going to have to learn how to do. We have to learn how to corral the beast, right?
Yeah. in
AI is a
the
little,
interest of in the interest of that child, and it was interesting because after I did focus groups, and I did the focus group with the experienced educators as well as for the teacher candidates who had participated in the initial IEP development. And the experienced educators were really talking about a lot of different directions in terms of how an IEP might be today versus tomorrow and next year, and would the AI system give them similar goals the following year, or would it really update the goals? Because that is one of the questions that sometimes comes up when you look at IEPs over time, that the goals tend to be somewhat similar, although the objectives may be different underneath, and certainly the criteria should be different.
yeah, that's interesting. All right, so let me ask you this. This sounds fantastic, and um, like I said, I was really impressed with the study you did, and it really it's interesting, and it makes me feel very hopeful that we're on the right track. We can contain AI and use it as a tool to empower teachers. But let me ask you, what do you have any studies in the future you want to do with AI? Just curious what your next steps are.
My next step is and it came from the experienced educators. What do parents think about AI generated IEPs or AI being used to generate IEPs or families? I'm really concerned about that and being transparent with families. But as I mentioned at the conference, people have been using IEP goal banks forever for at least 4 decades, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure anybody shares with families at that time. But I think AI is different, and there's so many cautions related to AI, and even one of the teacher candidates was really strong in bringing out that I look at it as a resource. Like my clinical educator is writing a report, and she might ask a colleague how to help her phrase a particular sentence, and that's the way she saw AI being used. But everyone said that it can't replace the knowledge and skills of the educator that is there. So yeah, it definitely, I want to see parents and talk to them or family members. And I don't know if I mentioned it to you, but someone I was talking to the day before I went to CEC, I was talking to a parent who had just been involved in her child's IEP. And she said before the meeting, she actually went into AI and had it suggest a goal for her that she could bring to the meeting for her child. So I thought that was an interesting plan. And I always love to get families' perspective, particularly with IEPs, because it's such an important component of the program.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what we almost have to really do is completely change the way we look at the IEP process now that we have this tool, right? Because in some ways, I know I was talking to a sped director the other day, and one of his fear was, he says, look, I'm a little reluctant to in our system, right? Because our system would write the first draft PLAF.
Mhm.
And he said, I'm a little reluctant to have that happen because I don't want the PLAF to get written and then they're in the meeting and the teacher doesn't know where the data came from.
Yes.
I was like, well, I mean, our assessment's doing the analysis anyway, and I was thinking, yeah, that's a valid thing, but the problem is what happens now is they don't take the time, maybe because they don't have the time to write it properly, so it becomes very generalized. Richard's in fifth grade, he's really low in numeracy, we need to work in arithmetic, right? It becomes these vague terms sometimes that aren't detailed enough. I think the thing is, how do you shift this workflow? It's a lot of work, right? So I think there's a lot of work that's going to have to go into the next few steps in order to change how we look at it. And I'm always very positive, and I love technology, but in the end of the day, we have to do it safely.
Yes. And as you were talking, I'm saying, well, you know, I wouldn't want to be the director whose IEP goes to a hearing. The IEP goes to a hearing, and the AI was the one who generated significant components of that IEP, as opposed to, and the teacher not knowing.
Yeah.
So you can not it's got to be the teacher first, and AI just being
Hmm.
a resource that can help support. I mean, one of the other studies that was presented at CEC in our data blitz, they compared teacher generated IEP goals with teacher generated plus AI support IEP goals, and there was no difference in those either, which
Okay.
is encouraging to know that the teachers, both my teacher candidates and the teachers that were in that study, are doing a good job generating those IEP goals and those components of IEP as good as AI,
Hmm.
because there was no difference in them. So let's
Interesting.
prepare, let's provide that professional development to practicing teachers and our pre-service teachers so they know how to do that. And then when they need some resource, some ideas, they can go to AI.
You know, it just sort of made me have a little epiphany just now when you're talking about this. You know what you could do is, I mean, again, our system is generating a first draft PLAF, right?
Right.
What if you then forced it to go through a teacher review process where they have to go through and on each sentence by sentence, they have to confirm, tweak, and you almost recorded the red line edits, right? And so you
Mm-hmm.
almost have a stop, like, hey, here it is, first draft, and now is stopped. It has to go to the next step, which is teacher edited and reviewed. And
Yes, and
you force a
yeah.
break, right?
Right. In fact, one study I went to before I went to CEC, I had gone to Association of Teacher Educators conference, and there someone presented a study where they talked about they the educator had the students generate a first draft of something, some prompt through AI. And then they had to take it and revise it, but leave what AI's components were in red. So they were embellishing what AI had. And at my institution, they say at best an AI can generate a C-level paper. So you have to, you really have to, and you can tell when it's something's AI generated anyway.
All right. Well, I feel like we can go on forever. This is really fascinating. But I definitely will be in touch offline with you some more because
Okay.
I want to talk to you some more about, we're at that stage now where we're trying to operationalize our prompts for each district. And I think I'd love to talk to you more about that later on if you're open to it. So,
Okay. Well, thank you. This has been fun. It's
yeah,
always fun to talk about things you're passionate about. So,
for sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Ryan.
okay.
And
Take
I
care.
hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Accelerating Education is sponsored by Let's Go Learn, maker of K-12 precision diagnostic assessment and instruction software. Thanks for listening, and be sure to check out our next episode of Accelerating Education.